Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk Pain, Navigating Arthritis Together webinar. My name is Rick Phillips, and I am located in central Indiana. I contend with chronic kidney disease, type 1 diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, and ankylosing spondylitis. I have been living with arthritis now for over 20 years. During that time, I have found that there are not really great ways to deal with pain, but unless you are consistent. And that is what makes being here this evening so unique and so cool. I know firsthand how chronic pain can take a toll on someone, not only physically, but also mentally and emotionally. And life with chronic illness can be a juggling act, one in which you're constantly trying to balance your own needs while also trying to maintain and prioritize the other important relationships around you. Throughout the years, I have developed some skills and adapted strategies that made a huge difference in my life. And tonight, along with our expert panel, we're going to share those coping mechanisms that can help you live more fully despite chronic pain. But before we get started, a few housekeeping notes about tonight's event. We've muted all attendees for the event, but you can direct any questions, thoughts that you have throughout the presentation to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll start with a quick presentation and then move on to a roundtable discussion. After tonight's session, you will receive an email asking about your experience. Those surveys help the foundation better plan for future events. So please take time to fill them out. In particular, say you like the host. Recording of tonight's event will be included in your post-event survey, as well as available on the Arthritis Foundation's YouTube channel. Let's get started. We have with us tonight Afton Hassett, a clinical psychologist. Dr. Hassett is a pain psychologist and director of clinical trials research for one of the foremost pain research teams in the world, the Chronic Pain and Fatigue Research Center at the University of Michigan. She is also an associate professor with tenure and the director of pain and opioid research in the Department of Anesthesiology at the University of Michigan. With over $14 million of research funding from the National Institutes of Health, Dr. Hassett's mission is to bring evidence-based strategies from research and academic settings to people themselves. She has a national and international reputation as the go-to person when discussing the role of resilience and positive emotions in the experience of pain. She teaches those skills to patients, their healthcare providers, and undergraduate and graduate students. This is her passion, this is her purpose, and tonight we are so excited to have her. Before we dive into our discussion, Dr. Hassett will take us through some quick pointers about applying psychology to cope with pain. Dr. Hassett, thank you so much for being with us this evening.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for the kind introduction, Rick. And thank you to Arthritis Foundation and for the attendees and the panelists. We're going to start today just talking a little bit about the basics of pain. This is based on some of what we understand about the neuroscience of pain and also what we understand about the incredible power of our thoughts, our emotions, our relationships, and our behaviors in impacting the experience of chronic pain. What is pain? Is pain a good thing ever? Yes. Pain is important. People who don't have pain receptors are purpose to tell us that we need to slow down, need to be aware that we might need to take better care of ourselves. So pain can serve a really important purpose. Another key thing to understand about pain is that, especially in the case of chronic pain, what we see all the time is that the damage that might be seen on an MRI or some other scan really might not reflect what a person's experience is. And I've had this happen to myself. About 4 years ago, I fell and I broke my patella, and I wasn't sure it was broken. And I went to go see a physician's assistant, and he ran an MRI of both of my knees, and he came back to me and he said, "Hey, Afton, your right knee is broken. I'm so sorry to tell you that. But I'm really concerned about your left knee." And I said, my left knee wasn't broken or injured. He says, "You have terrible osteoarthritis in that knee. Does it hurt?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, you've got osteoarthritis in your right knee too, but your left knee is terrible. Are you sure it doesn't hurt?" And I said, "No." And while might seem like a rare thing, this is really common, that very often what the damage that is shown in MRI is not reflected in what a person's experience is. And often people will have terrible pain in a back or a knee or a wrist or a hand, and the MRI will not reflect that pain. So what is that? How is it that people have pain where there's no observable damage? Well, that really can maybe be explained a little bit by some concepts that we think about a lot in chronic pain. And my team is amazing. They spend, at least a big chunk of the team spends a lot of time using fMRI, or a functional magnetic resonance imaging, to look at the brain as it is actually functioning, experiencing pain. And in doing that, we've identified that there is kind of two different pain states. First, the most common pain state that you're probably really comfortable and aware of is bottom-up pain. This is where maybe you injure an ankle. You turn that ankle running down the stairs, and boom, you get pain that shoots from that ankle up to your brain, and your brain says, "Wow, you got pain." Well, this is true also for conditions like osteoarthritis, where maybe the pain is more consistent, but that pain is, no mistake, coming from those bones grinding on each other. And that grinding pain sparks those little nociceptors, those little pain receptors, and the message goes to the brain. The brain says pain. That's bottom-up pain. That can also be from inflammation, like in rheumatoid arthritis, where the inflammation in the joints can cause pain, and then boom, that goes up to the brain. The brain says pain. Well, there's a second type of pain that is really important for us to understand, especially in the case of chronic pain. And that's what we know as top-down pain. So top meaning the brain, where the pain is starting in the brain, and it is protruding or projecting down to the body. So you might be experiencing pain in your knee. That pain may be driven predominantly by the brain. And so an example of this might be phantom limb pain. Most of us have heard of phantom limb pain. That's where an individual might have, say, a leg or an arm removed because of an accident or a disease. And months or even years later, they still experience pain in that limb. The brain is saying your leg that is no longer there is tremendously in pain. Your foot that no longer there is on fire. And what has happened there is that brain has a representation of that limb. And even if that limb is missing, the brain is still detecting and understanding that. And so that pain is real. That pain is experienced, but that pain is not driven by that leg, because that leg is gone. So that's a really strong example of top-down pain, but also fibromyalgia and conditions like that. Even some conditions like chronic low back pain are often considered top-down pain, where the pain is predominantly driven by the brain. Even though the injury may have originally caused the back pain, it's now changed. So what we do in research and in clinical practice is try and really understand what's the source of the pain. Is it inflammation? Is it osteoarthritis, is it bone grinding? Or is it really the brain now has adapted and is now making pain on its own? And so this is a really powerful understanding. It's not that you're making up the pain is truly being driven by the brain. So there is a really great seminar for you to watch if you're really interested about learning more about the neurobiology of chronic pain. And that was recorded by Dan Claw and by Tamara Huff. They both talk more about, the process of chronic pain and from a real neurobiological standpoint. So you can understand more about this notion of top down or bottom up. A second resource I'd love to share with you is my book that just came out about a month ago. It's the Chronic Pain Reset, and we call it the 30 Days of Activities, Practices, and Skills to Help You Thrive. And what this book consists of is pain self-management, but a big piece of it, the first bunch of chapters, are about kind of the neuroscience of pain that I say is gently translated, that helps you understand more about these concepts we've kind of introduced tonight, and more about the concepts that Dr. Claw and Huff discuss in the Arthritis Foundation webinar, and also with a lot of humor and examples to help us, better grasp these notions. Because in later chapters, we talk about how our thoughts and our emotions also influence how our brain processes pain. And we talk about the notion that if you have strong negative emotions, your pain can be made worse. So an example of that might be, again, when you twist that ankle and you're laying there on the ground thinking, I hate this. This is the worst thing that happened. I'm such a stupid idiot. This is awful. Your pain is likely to be experienced as much more intense. Conversely, if you trip and you twist that ankle and you start laughing at yourself because it seems like such a silly thing to do and your friends laugh with you, that pain often is going to be experienced as much less painful. So there is a very strong relationship between these ties, but also a strong relationship between behaviors. And what we do then is we take the notion that if you use evidence-based strategies, you may be able to influence and actually help rewire the dysfunctional pain networks that are causing the chronic pain. And so there are ways that we can think, ways that we can behave, and ways that we can move and act that can actually start helping our brain make new connections. Sleeping, exercise, and our relationships all can be incredibly influential. And so the book is about trying these different activities, skills, and practices and picking the ones that work best for you, and then building a longer term plan to help you take this personalized plan and use it going forward. So we really do want to return to the notion that because pain is in your brain, it does not mean that it's in your head. So I think that is probably one of the most dismissive experiences people with chronic pain can encounter, is working with clinicians, physicians, and others that poo-poo your pain, that don't really think your pain is important. And maybe you might be depressed, that depression then is thought to explain the pain, and that's not what's going on. More frequently than not, our data show that depression and anxiety are more likely to follow chronic pain, that chronic pain is more often to be a reaction to what it's like to live life with chronic pain. And I probably don't have to tell any of you, but when you have chronic pain, you have to really kind of focus on the things that you must do, the things that are required of you, the work, the errands, the bill paying, the tending to family members. And then often what you put off are the things that you love and care for the most. And these valued life activities, when set aside, can really contribute to these feelings of depression and anxiety, and feeling that, you've kind of lost your sense of self and you kind of your roadmap forward. So the key then is to kind of help you move back towards bringing these positive aspects back. And we'll talk more about that in a second, because the key thing is that losing these positive emotions, losing these activities really starts to impact how your brain is processing those pain signals. So it's not just so that you can have a happy life, it's really so you can have a happy brain, that you do need to introduce these more adaptive thoughts, more adaptive emotions back to your brain. And so you can start experiencing ideally less pain, because you can begin to reset your brain. So what does this really mean? We can move forward with things that we can actually do. Right. So chronic pain exists. And yes, physicians and physical therapists and occupational therapists can help us really adapt and make tremendous strides in controlling our disease and controlling our life. But there's so much that we can do. And we've learned a lot of this through this study of the therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy that really focuses not on that pain is in your head, but that, you know what, pain is in your brain, and we can teach you some remarkable skills to help you better manage your pain. Anything from better pacing your activities so that you don't create a pain flare to begin with, to really changing how you respond to pain. So, we talked a little bit about when, pain occurs, if we think catastrophizing negative thoughts that can just do nothing but ratchet up that pain signal to create actually a response from your stress response system. There is a common occurrence where pain is detected in the brain as threat. Because if you add fear and anxiety into that mix, the brain starts to see pain as a threat now and even ratchets up the stress and the experience of pain more. So, really, how will you respond to your pain? How will you respond to the difficulties that can be created by living with pain? Make a huge difference in how you experience pain behaviorally, emotionally, and thought wise, but also physiologically. So, cognitive behavioral therapy has been shown in studies to actually change how your brain is processing the pain. It's changing some of the connectivity, the networks that cause the problematic pain amplification to begin with that top down pain notion. Another key element that we can do is really based on the principles of behavior activation. So, what happens often when we have chronic pain is we tend to withdraw. We tend to not want to do anything that's going to trigger that pain, that's going to potentially make that pain worse. And so our world starts to constrict and get smaller. And we tend to do less and less. We tend to get less conditioned. And then what might happen is that your pain is worse, everything is worse, and you've actually withdrawn from all of your friends too. Your world has gotten so small. Behavioral activation is just the principles of getting us moving again, of doing activities that feel interesting and appealing and getting us up and moving and engaging. And it can be a small thing. It can be starting to take a walk with a friend for 5 minutes, enjoying nature. It can be something as small as regularly joining a friend for a cup of coffee, or regularly spending time with a family member that you really enjoy who makes you laugh, or starting your hobby again. So just starting to move towards these things that feel joyful and rewarding are really key. And then another principle I want to touch on that is related to all of this, that pain rarely happens in a vacuum. I've often spoken to people who with rheumatic disease that say, yes, pain is terrible, but I'll tell you, fatigue is the killer. How is it that I have a chronic pain condition, but where my fatigue is the worst part? And another person will say, I don't know, sleep is what wipes me out. And then if my sleep is bad, my pain is worse. So these observations are recognized as being part of a common group of symptoms that cluster together when people are ill. We refer to these, actually, it's Dave Williams, my colleague, a fellow psychologist at the University of Michigan, along with Andrew Schreff, a neuroscience researcher, who have kind of coined the term space symptoms. And it's just a way to think about these symptoms together: sleep, pain, affect or emotions, cognition, how we think and how we're able to think, and energy, or on the conversely, fatigue. So what's fascinating about these symptoms is that most people have a space profile. This is something I talk a lot about in the book, is kind of figuring out what your space profile is. What of these symptoms bother you? Which of them bother you the most? Which of them is the worst? Because what's really amazing about space symptoms is if you impact one of them, you'll impact the rest. So, for example, if your sleep gets worse, your pain will often get worse and your mood will get worse. This is kind of the track we see where depression follows the onset of pain. So, sleep is key, because conversely, when we can help people start sleeping better, it's amazing how the other symptoms change too. You start sleeping better, your pain gets better, your mood gets better, your thinking can start to clear. and you can start to concentrate better. And also, you might find less fatigue or your energy is better. So, if you improve one space symptom, you can improve and influence them all. So, these are all kind of key elements when we think about what are the importance of our thoughts, our cognitions, our emotions, and our behaviors. How do these actually impact? And one of the ways that they can impact how we experience pain is through impacting our space symptoms. So, this is a hot topic: acceptance. Practicing acceptance. Really? I love this cranky man's face. He's like, "You really want me to accept pain? Are you crazy? Because to accept it means that now I've given up getting rid of it." That's not right. That isn't what it means. Acceptance just simply means that this thing exists in my life. We often see when people have a chronic illness, the point that they turn, they say, okay, I have rheumatoid arthritis. No matter how much kicking and screaming, it's not going to go away. It's part of my story. It's part of who I am. I don't have to like it, but I can accept it's part of who I am. And when we get there, we can now turn the corner and ask, what now? Once we stop fighting, we can start to dance and move forward. So, acceptance and commitment therapy is really the part of therapy that focuses on this notion. It is part of cognitive behavioral therapies. It's one of the newer versions of cognitive behavioral therapy. And what is at the heart of it that I think is so useful for us in our conversation now is acceptance and commitment therapy says, hey, acceptance doesn't mean I like it. It doesn't mean approval. It just means, all right, it is. And once we accept, we can stop saying, all right, I'll be happy when I get rid of this pain. I'll be happy when I get rid of this diagnosis. I'll be happy when I get rid of this disease. It teaches us that we can be happy despite the pain, the disease, the condition. It teaches us to start living now despite the pain, despite these things, living our lives towards our values. So I think this is a useful framework as we talk to our panelists, that have they come to a place of acceptance? Are they living their lives now? Have they, in a point in their lives, forestalled happiness, saying, I will be happy when, right? And part of what we can do to start living our lives is using these simple strategies that often come from the fields of positive psychology, from mindfulness based therapies, from cognitive behavioral therapy, from ACT. And these help us practice simple skills that we learn that ratchets down our stress, that decreases our anxiety, that helps spark a little more joy so it starts to alleviate depression, and helps us start thinking about life in a way that is different, that decreases stress, and helps us now think about possibilities rather than limitations. And when we do that, we become more resilient. And this is my love. This is the part of science that brings me such joy, because 20 years ago, 15 years ago, we weren't talking about positive emotions and where they fit. We were talking about resilience. We are now. I just did the keynote at the National Institutes of Health Yearly Pain Consortium, and the topic was pain and resilience, how far we have come. So the evidence has finally caught up and tells us that these are important concepts. So I'm so excited to hear more from our panelists about how it is that they have come to enhance their resilience, how they've begun to think about their lives differently, and what strategies that they use to move forward. So I'd like to begin with maybe a question, and then with each person, share a little bit about yourself with the guests. So my first question is about self-care strategies related to emotional well-being. And so thinking about the emotional challenges that you face due to living with pain and chronic illnesses, think about how you cope with them. And so we got a question in from another individual that asked, after 20 years of living with chronic pain, I'm tired of fighting. How do you remain hopeful when it feels like a never-ending battle? And so here we talk about that concept of battling the illness. Rick, I would love for you to get us started. You've given us a little bit of an introduction, but maybe you can talk about this kind of from a personal standpoint. Rick?
Thank you, and what a wonderful pre-presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Um, so uh, there are three ways I do it. First, I laugh at it. Nothing beats tearing the heart out of something that is trying to harm you, like laughing at it. And it seems like the more I laugh at it, the smaller it gets. The second thing is I'm so blessed to have my wife and I battle this together. We've been married 46 years, and we are in this together. And she reminds me that we are in this together, and we treat it as a together issue. And then finally, I continue to exercise. You know, we walk almost every day, and I can't tell you the number of times I don't want to go walking. But Cheryl will insist that we go walking, and she's very persuasive. And so we go walking, and sometimes I have to be persistent, and we go walking. But we go walking 12 months out of the year. We do between 1 and 2 miles each day. And the best part about it is we get coffee after. So there's nothing quite as fun as going to the local coffee shop with your beautiful wife to celebrate a walk complete.
That's so beautiful, Rick. There's so much to comment on, but the first thing that strikes me is that the evidence is so powerful for the power of walking and the power of walking in nature, but the power of walking with somebody you care about. So next segment, we'll talk more about relationships because that is so key. I love that you use humor. Again, there are data that are really powerful. When we laugh, not only do we diminish often the thing that might be frightening to us, but we also release hormones. We release happiness hormones like endorphins that are actually analgesic, that can actually offset pain. So those are great strategies. I'd like to hear from Stephanie too. Now, so Stephanie, what would you say your biggest losses are due to chronic pain? And what have you done to grieve those losses?
Yeah, great question, Dr. Hassett. And Rick, thank you for sharing your personal anecdote as well. I lost everything. I lost my career. I was a collegiate and then a professional athlete. I was diagnosed with osteoarthritis in my early 20s. So, and it cost me my career. The thing that I identified with most as a professional athlete, it was my life, it was my livelihood. So I think that was one of my biggest losses, and that came with losing my identity, who I was as a person, or who I thought I was as a person, who I represented, the country I carried on my shoulders. I represented the Puerto Rican women's national team. So I felt like I had so much to represent, and being diagnosed with OA and it ultimately ending my career, I felt like I disappointed not only myself, but everything that I represented. I felt like a failure. So that was what I thought then was a loss. And how I've grieved with that was to not see it as a loss, but a redirection. And I think once I was able to make that mindset shift of it wasn't a loss, it was a redirection. I wasn't supposed to be on that path. I was supposed to find something else to do. I had another purpose that maybe wasn't professional sports. But somehow I realized that I needed to go through that experience to gain skills, to gain a resilient personality, to be able to bounce back. And I think you speaking about resilience really resonated with me because I needed that to be able to have that that mindset shift. So I think that's how I've grieved with that particular loss, which I feel like it was the biggest loss when I got
Mhm.
diagnosed with OA and it ended my career, was to not look at it as a loss. It was a redirection.
That's so adaptive. I am really impressed because, I think that's something we hear over and over again. It's often a loss of identity and an identity you really embraced. That's a piece of it. And you probably still harbor that's still who you are, but your story has evolved. And
Mhm.
you found a new purpose, and that's what we see is often at the core of resilience, that people have an experience, they grieve it. You have to wallow in it for a while. You have to be sad, and then you think, what have I learned? And that can be some of the most powerful. And I've often spoken to people who said, you know what, I wouldn't change it. I learned
Yeah.
so much.
And Dr. Hassett, to be quite frank and quite honest for, everyone here, I didn't just have that mindset shift. I got help to be able
Yes.
to shift,
Right.
right? Like mental
Yeah.
health therapy. I didn't do that alone. I
Right.
had to cope. I had to figure it out. I have to practice coping skills. I still get in the slump and miss
Yeah.
that person that I thought I was supposed to be or whatever it is, but that person is still with me, as you indicated, right? I didn't lose that. It's just an
Right.
evolution of myself. But yes, I have to reach out to other resources
Mhm.
and services to be able to move forward.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I'm so glad you make that connection because there's still stigma. We're hesitant to reach out for help. We're strong people. We should be able to do this ourselves. But there's no owner's manual for how you deal with a life disruption like that. Just to have somebody bounce the idea off and to help you work through and come to another piece that's really powerful. And to me, that's strength. So when I mean, nobody's stronger than when they're saying, "Will you help me?" So good for you. Um, so let's turn a little bit to relationships, because relationships are really key in our world. So how has chronic pain influenced your relationships with family members? I love how Rick talked about his beautiful wife and what that's meant to him. But often our relationships change, and our relationships are one of our strongest sources of resilience. So I'd love to hear from Danny and Mariah to introduce yourselves briefly and then talk a little bit about how chronic pain has impacted the relationships in your life.
Hi, I'm
Mariah?
Danny
Okay. Yeah,
Fuentes.
Danny.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, Danny,
Yeah,
please go ahead.
I'm 37. I've lived with arthritis since I was 7 years old, so that's about 30 years. Um, so I've lost a lot of experience with relationships when it comes to arthritis. A big thing for me was uh, about 5 or 6 years ago, I was in a relationship and it actually ended because of my arthritis. Um, so I was friends with this girl for about 6 months, and then we dated for about 6 months. And throughout that, I actually had knee replacements during that time, and she was very supportive. But then during that time we were dating, I was between jobs. I didn't have insurance, so I was behind on my medications, and I had a terrible flare up one day, and one of those where you can't get out of the bed. If you've got to go to the bathroom, you're shuffling along, or you need a walker or maybe a wheelchair to get there. And she saw that and didn't realize that that could happen with arthritis. And that made me realize that I hadn't really talked about my arthritis. I just assumed that people could see my limp, or since she
Mm.
knew about my knee replacements, that she knew what entailed an arthritis. But after we finally had that conversation, she thought that once I replaced my knees or my hips, that it would be all over. But then she realized that she wouldn't be able to handle, if I did end up in a crippling situation where I
Mhm.
couldn't walk or I couldn't, go to the bathroom or something like that. So now with all my relationships, I'm more open about it. I
Oh,
tell them how my pain can affect me, how the fatigue really can affect my day to day, like say wanting to go out, maybe um, to the club or something like that.
yeah.
Um, so what I try to do now is to ease it into, say, a conversation, or even when dating, I will put in, say, my profile that I volunteer since I've been volunteering with the Arthritis and Foundation. And that's why I got involved with the Arthritis Foundation, was to share my story so people can realize that maybe not everyone knows what you're going through, even though they can
Mhm.
see it. So it's better to be honest with yourself and with other people about the pain that you experience.
Ah, Danny, that's so powerful and so hard to do, but it probably pays you great dividends when
Oh,
people know
yes.
front, right? Man,
Yes.
that's your courage and your resilience that you can come to a place that this is how you do business. So that's great advice. Mariah, you want to talk a little bit about
Sure.
you?
So I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis when I was 25 years old. At the time, I was in the middle of law school, and I was a very busy, very active person. Not a professional athlete, but I was the only grad student on the university's club water polo team, just because I thought it was fun. And if you don't know anything about water polo, it's a super intense
Tough.
sport. So I was a very active person.
Mhm.
And so, over the course of my diagnosis, I went from being a person who could play a whole water polo game no problem to someone who was, struggling to get out of bed and walk to my classes. And that was a really difficult transition for me. And it took a while to sink in how this was going to change my life. And when I did finally figure out how it's going to change my life, I started to think about how it was going to change my partner's life as well. We had been dating for about 5 years at that point, and we weren't engaged or, fully committed to each other for life. We weren't married. And so I actually sat him down and I said, hey, this is something I have to live with for the rest of my life, but you don't necessarily have to. Like, are you sure this is what you want? And I took the chance to be open with him, and which probably after 5 years was a little easier. And luckily for me, he wanted to stay, and now we've been married for 12 years. And like Rick said, we treat it at my health is an our problem, and we now have
Yeah.
3 children, and it's a family work in progress, making sure that every member of our family has their needs met, which includes mine. And sometimes that means that we need to balance things a little bit differently. But that's one of the things that we keep it. It's a family matter.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's really, really key, that it feels like we have a condition, we have a situation that we share amongst ourselves. And so either Stephanie or Rick, how do you explain pain and its impact? We got some really great, thoughts from Mariah and Danny. How is it that you two go about telling others in your life about what this beast is that you deal with?
I couldn't be more straightforward. Uh, you know, the advice from Danny and Mariah to me is so pertinent. Uh, I have type 1 diabetes, and I recall back when I was 19 and asked my wife to marry me. And she said yes, and I called off the engagement because I didn't know if she could or wanted to be able to deal with type 1 diabetes for the rest of our lives. She obviously convinced me that she was, and we got married. And I got to tell you, whether it's in the workplace or it's in a social situation, if people don't like me because I have chronic disease, then they don't like me. And I got to move on. I remember going for a job interview, and I was always so straightforward about chronic disease. And the interviewer said, well, we've had really good interviews, or anything else you want to tell me? And I said, yeah, sit down, because here's the list. And I didn't get that job. And I thought I should have gotten that job. But the deal is, if they couldn't deal with me with chronic disease, then they were never going to deal with me, because I'm a whole person. And that's the way I treat. That's the way I treat chronic disease. That's the way I treat it all. I'm very much an open book.
Good for you, Rick. And again, that takes a lot of courage. How about you, Stephanie? How do you handle describing your condition to people you care
Yeah,
about?
thank you for that question. I think I sense a common thread here that my response will align with, and that's self-advocacy. You know, being able to speak about your condition, especially for me, my OA is an invisible chronic illness. Sometimes I may have a limp if I'm flared, but sometimes I don't. I may just be in pain and you don't even see it. So being able to communicate that with others, not letting stigma get in the way of that, in my personal relationships and even with my own family members who even know about my condition, telling them how I'm feeling that day or in that moment. And the big one, asking for help. I'm still
Mm.
getting better at that as an independent, stubborn Latina who's a little hot-headed sometimes. It's very to ask for help, but I'm getting better at it still. Hey, I'm flared up today. I can't stand up for, 25 minutes to do the
Yeah.
dishes. Do you mind taking this off of my plate? So I'm getting better at that, but I think what I hear everyone here saying is, having that courage to self-advocate for yourself and
Yeah.
provide that education because people don't know.
Yeah. I love that. And I think the other piece too is that your friends, the people who really love you, want to help. And you're usually surprised, oh, I don't want to ask for help. But as soon as you do, it's like they're like, thank you.
So
I've been trying
true,
to do
so true.
something. You're so darn independent. And I want to do something. It'll make me feel better as your friend. So, and other relationships, Mariah, you're a parent?
Yeah,
How
I
does
have
this, yeah.
I have 3 children.
Oh my gosh, how does the pain affect your ability to parent? How do you talk to them about your pain? What's this like for you?
So I I think what you were saying, what Dr. Hesse was saying earlier about acceptance, I have accepted that my family is not like other families. I don't compare my family to other families. And that means sometimes we make choices as a family that work for us that aren't necessarily the same as other kids. And it's easy to look at my neighbors and my kids' classmates and see that those kids are enrolled in 700 after school activities, and it's easy for me to feel like, oh, am I letting my kids down by only enrolling each kid in one so that I can handle that reasonably? And I don't think that I am. I think that, limiting our family to an amount of activity that we can handle realistically without being a burden on me is a really smart and healthy move for our family. And one thing that helped me, really let go of that guilt was there's a book by Brene Brown called The Gifts of Imperfection. And in the book, she talks about these different guideposts for wholehearted living, she calls it. And one of the things she talks about is letting go of being busy as a status symbol. And as you were mentioning, like incorporating things that like play and hobbies and things that like bring you joy, incorporating that instead of focusing on being busy. And so after reading that, I really felt like I had more permission to kind of direct my family in a way that worked for my family and not compare to the way other families were doing it.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a big thing. But it's not just in the disease communities, it's like everywhere. We do this as humans. The more we
Mm-hmm.
set ourselves up to compare, the harder it is. And the more that we're able to draw back and say, hey, this is my family. This is different. And this is how we do business. So that is so cool. And I know there are support systems and other resources for parents. Can you tell us more about Mamas Facing Forward?
Well, so there weren't as many support resources and
Yeah.
information for when I first wanted to get pregnant and have a family. So I started a website and support group called Mamas Facing Forward that's open to anyone living with a chronic illness who, has questions about pregnancy or parenthood while living with a chronic illness. I would say the majority of the people in there are living with some form of inflammatory arthritis because that's what I have and it travels by word of mouth. But we've also got parents living with IBD and other types of chronic illness. And it's really surprising how much we have in common with people with different diseases. There's some really unique challenges that you face as a parent living with a chronic illness. And so I thought it was really important to connect with other people who are going through the same thing. Because, you know, when I first had my children, my very first baby, I had friends who had their first babies right around the same time. It was wonderful to be going through motherhood with them, but I was facing challenges that they were not facing and didn't know how to help me with. At the time, there wasn't as much data about medication use during breastfeeding. So
Oh,
I
yeah.
was choosing between breastfeeding my son and taking my RA meds. And that was a really difficult choice that would have been easier to handle with people who understood what I was going through. And luckily, it's less of an issue now with the better data on the medication use. But that's just an example of how it can really be helpful to connect with people who truly understand what you're going through.
Yeah, and good for you to see a hole in our supports or a need because you ran into it yourself and to work to fill it. Again, that's creating some purpose in your life,
Mhm.
right? You've really kind of taken this negative and really made it something very powerful. And it's always so gratifying when you can support others and share what you learned. So it's not about just taking, it's also about giving. So good.
Absolutely.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about our friendships. We're kind of dwelling on our relationships because this is such an important element of our resilience. And I think our friends, the people we choose to make part of our family, is really important. And having, a good friends. And so, but they change. Danny, can you tell us a little bit about maybe how some of your friendships have changed because of chronic pain, or maybe some of them for the better? What's the road been like for you with your friendships?
Well, since I've grown up with arthritis, people have always, like I said, kind of known me as, at least when I was in school, they all knew me as a kid with, arthritis or some sort of chronic illness. So they were always protective of me. But as an adult, things are a little harder because they uh, don't really see arthritis as a young person, illness. So it's a little harder for them to see that. So if we're doing something, say like going to a concert, I'll explain that I might need to sit down away from them, maybe halfway through the concert, because I'll
Yeah.
either be fatigued or my joints will swell. And if you've got good friends, they won't mind that. They'll work with you. Maybe someone will come and sit down with you, Usually I find that the ones that aren't supportive end up going by the wayside on their
Yeah.
own, and that's fine with me. I want, like Rick and Mariah said, I want people that support me,
Mhm.
and friends included. You want people that understand that. So
Yeah.
that's what I look for when,
Yeah.
you know,
No, we were talking about healthy relationships, and that this is pertinent to people with disease, but it's pertinent to people that, we need to do a good job of choosing people that, are supportive of us, that sustain us, that don't enable us, but that, are good to us. And the other thing I love of what you were talking about is not letting your illness make you miss everything, but accommodating,
yes,
making changes, right? And that's what we need to
exactly.
do always, right? I mean, you might not like loud music and not necessarily be a person with disease, but so you make accommodations. Well, we do that with our illnesses too. So that's so important. Thank you for that. Um, so pain can be spontaneous. So a person wrote ahead, how do you maintain friendships when you have to periodically cancel plans because your pain or if your disease is unpredictable, like many of our autoimmune diseases are? How do you do this? Does anyone want to comment on this, or I have
I
nobody in
have a
particular?
small suggestion. So
Yeah.
one thing I like to do is um, find hobbies that are good for you and enjoy those hobbies. And usually you'll find friends that enjoy those same hobbies, whether that's bike riding and you might use a different bike than them. Like I use a tricycle because uh, a regular bike is a little hard for me to get on and off, but with a tricycle, it's easier. And people that bike ride with me, they understand that. Maybe I'll be into Legos or model building. Finding friends to do that with you, is very easy when you all like the same things. So if you find things that you like, you'll find friends that like doing what you do.
Yeah, that's so good. But that's being brave. That means you got to kind of get out there
Yeah.
and
Yes.
connect. But I love that. If you love to read, find a book club. If you love art, go to, take a class. There's so many things we can do, but that's great advice. Anybody else have some good advice like that?
Yeah, I was actually typing a response to a participant, but I'm just going to
Yeah.
answer it aloud.
Yeah.
Nathaniel typed in the chat,
Yeah.
in addition to seeking out therapy, what have you learned that you share with someone who is going through a big life change like this? And
Ah,
so finding other hobbies, just
yeah.
like Danny said, that are similar or that
Mhm.
give you the same um, feelings that maybe prior hobbies gave you. So for me, it's being competitive. So,
Yeah.
right, finding hobbies that I can't go play basketball anymore. That's like out of the question. Like I can't survive it. But what can I do? So I do other sporting type activities that have lower impact. Sometimes I can go jogging if my knee permits. I can't
Mhm.
go do all the cutting and agility that's required in basketball, but I could do
Right.
a jog or maybe the treadmill because it's softer impact. Last year I tried rock climbing and it was really fun and it's low impact because you're
Yeah.
using your muscles to climb up and
Mhm.
you wouldn't think of that as, as low impact, but belay
Yeah.
assisted rock climbing is something that I tried. And you can get competitive with that, especially if you go with your partner and you make it to the top before they do. So that was fueling that competitive edge for me. So, trying to be creative and not limiting yourself. Oh, I wouldn't like that. I'm not going to try that. That's not what I like. Just go try
Mm.
it and see. You never know. And you might meet people along the way as well.
So Stephanie, first of all, I bet you're competitive just going to the grocery store.
Oh yeah. I can find it cheaper. I can find a cheaper price. Yeah, the whole nine. Yeah.
But that's awesome. But that's taking what you know about yourself, what you know to be a strength or part of your character, or who you are, and thinking, okay, well, where do I go with this next? I'm not be able to do the hard cutting of basketball and playing, but you know what? I can use my big muscle groups, and so I can do this. So that's really cool. And I think that's what sometimes we lament that we've lost a sport or something we really love, but sometimes we can adapt it and we can keep a piece of it and and kind of continue. Great. Other thoughts? Any thoughts from Rick, maybe?
Sorry, I was typing, uh, typing in response.
How do
Uh,
you connect with friends? What do you do with your illness to find rich friendships?
well, I found most of these people,
Yeah.
and I do that through the Arthritis Foundation and other events. I mean, I love attending events like this, and uh, I think that I tend to activate myself in uh, in areas where I know I will be supported.
Yeah.
I also really value my church relationships, and uh, I have attended regularly for years, and that's an important source of a place where I find friendships, and frankly, I find people who like to laugh in both of those places. And then ultimately, I see 16 doctors a year.
Mm.
And one thing that I do is I find doctors who will laugh with me. And if doctors won't laugh with me, if they won't help me make fun
Mhm.
of my condition, I don't go see them again. I don't like that. So, I had to see a pulmonologist, and the guy was stiff, and I I found somebody else. And if you're not going to laugh with me, then I'm at the age where if I'm not having fun, I'm not going to do it.
I love the
And
way you think.
and uh, that of course you can buy that with time. Uh, I wasn't that way when I was 50, but I am at 66. And so I seek out people who have fun, people who laugh, people who are not focused on themselves. And I find wonderful people like these,
Yeah.
and like people who are on our call right now.
Yeah. Thank you. I love that you said that too. You guys, you have such great advice here. But finding fellowship, be it where your spiritual home is, or where your intellectual home is, where your sports teams are, or where's a foundation with other people who have walked in your shoes to some degree and can really understand and share new ideas and tips to help survive. And we are down to our last 5 minutes. It's gone so fast. What a beautiful session this has been. Thank you, guys. But I want to spend the last few minutes just talking about kind of some final thoughts. So each of you, can you please maybe share a practice that maybe feeds your soul? Do you gratitude journal? Do you do acts of kindness? What do you do to bring joy in your life? And then maybe just, what do you recommend? What have you learned? If you have to dispense one piece of advice. So something that you do to feed your soul, and what's one piece of advice you dispense? Okay.
I'll start.
Great. I was hoping somebody would start. It's a big question. Go ahead, Rick.
The one thing I do to absolutely feed my soul is I continue to learn new things. I got my doctorate of education after I had to stop working when I was in my 50s, and I'm in school presently. And I will probably always be in school to do something. So I find my joy there. And one great piece of information I always pass along in my community is, if you're thinking of, if you are either a mother or you're thinking of becoming a mother, Mama's Face Forward is the place to go.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Great. Who would like to go next?
Well, I guess that's me, right? Since it's
Okay,
so kind of
we'll
you,
go
Rick.
to you, Mariah. Then we'll go to Stephanie and Danny. Go ahead, Mariah.
I think for me, the thing that brings me joy is my family. And it was a long, all three of my pregnancies were after my RA diagnosis. And so it wasn't an easy process to get the family that I have. And so another thing that brings me joy is helping people find the information and resources that they need. For me, my soapbox, my pet issue is pregnancy and parenting. But the advice that I would give to others is that, it's easy to get bogged down in like how to treat this symptom and is the disease under control. But just because you have a diagnosis doesn't mean that you should give up on your life goals. Like, you are allowed to have life goals, and you want to have providers who take those life goals into account. So they're looking at your short-term goals and your long-term goals and helping you find ways to get there. And like Rick was saying, if your provider is not taking your life goals into account, you find yourself a new provider who will.
Oh my God, that's so important. And I love that they're actually starting to teach this. What is the patient's actual goal? Is it to get from a 7 to a 5 in their pain, or is it that they can garden again? And to take these things into consideration.
We have lives, and whether it's for me it was starting a family, but it could be getting your dream job or taking your dream vacation or graduating from school, whatever it is. Like, you deserve that in your life.
That's brilliant. Thank you. All right, Stephanie, what's your joy and what's your bit of advice?
Yes. So, this is a big question. So first I have to start with this, but I'm a social worker first, and I'm also a social work researcher. I'm currently a PhD candidate at the University of South Florida School of Social Work. And so my research is around osteoarthritis and sort of the biopsychosocial effects of the disease. And I have a particular interest in the young adult population because it is under research. So my joy is to be able to contribute to this area, so that someone coming after me, right, doesn't have to go through everything that I went through, doesn't have to struggle as much. My joy is finding the Arthritis Foundation and finding ways to volunteer, finding that community within the Arthritis Foundation and beyond. this year, I also just published an article. It's called Osteoarthritis Affects Us Too, and it's specifically focusing on younger adults with OA, which is pretty novel because there's not a lot of research about 18 to 45 years old, 18 to 45-year-olds with OA, because we typically thought about it as an old person's disease. And everything we've kind of covered on this webinar kind of came out in that research. Younger adults are struggling with social life. We didn't even touch on it, but sex life, right? So we didn't, lack of resources and lack of care tailored to younger adult patients, right? We didn't even get into the weeds of all of that. So I love being the representation of that and not letting my disease define me, but instead using my chronic condition to help the next person or the next generation. So that's my joy in a nutshell. And if anyone wants access to that research, that article or anything, please let me know. I can provide it to you for free of cost, because I know some of these things are behind paywalls. Let's see, what was the other question? That's my joy.
Your advice.
Oh yeah,
my piece of advice.
I think what I just said. So don't let the chronic illness define you. Instead, find a way to use it. Whether it's for someone else, to help someone else, or even just to help yourself. How can you use that energy that you currently use by being upset about being diagnosed with this disease, or ruminating on what could have been? How can you use that same energy and apply it to yourself to be better present for your family, for yourself, for your loved ones, for your community, for your church community, whatever it is? How can you use that same energy in a different, more positive way?
Oh, that's wonderful stuff. I'm so excited about your doctor. You have to call me. We'll have to talk offline. I'm so interested in young adults, because you're right. There's just a dearth of research. There's nothing there. So you're in a good spot. Oh, thanks. Danny, you've got a tough thing to close out. These are such great bits of joy and advice, but I know you're up to the task. What brings you joy?
Doing this, like Stephanie said, when I was growing up, like I said, I was diagnosed at the age of 7. So I went through my teenage years with arthritis, and I had no one to talk to. I grew up in the middle of West Texas. I had to drive, 5 to 8 hours just to see a doctor. So I never had anyone to give me advice. So after that relationship ended because of my arthritis, I wanted to, talk to young adults like Stephanie and, have them be real with themselves, but also help those children that maybe in high school, junior high, and wondering about how they handle things, because there was never anyone there for me. So I've volunteered with the Arthritis Foundation since 2016. I've done the family conferences multiple years in a row. I usually do the relationship panels because of my story. But if I'm even able to help one kid, just be real with themselves and, help them on their journey to growing up, then that makes me happy. So
I think you've helped a lot of people today. What's your piece of advice?
Be real with yourself. Like I said earlier, be honest about your pain with yourself and with others. Be honest about your fatigue, because I think that's what gets me now, is that I'm getting up there in age or whatever, but I've had my hips replaced and my knees replaced. So most of my pain is gone, but the fatigue's still there. So I explain to people, I might not be up for going to the farmer's market today. I need an extra little nap in the day. So just be honest with yourself and other people.
Good for you. Well, you guys, what a lovely time. It's been an honor and a privilege to share with our viewers, and to actually spend time with you guys and hear your experience and your hope. So this is great. So Rick, I yield it back to you to go ahead and close us out.
Dr. Hassett, thank you so much for moderating this important conversation and lending your time and expertise tonight. And thanks to our star patient panel for sharing their incredible insight. I've certainly gained new understanding about pain and how to deal with it. And I think that others in this community probably have as well. I know I'm eager to try some of it. Just before we wrap up, I want to run over some great things that are going on. The Foundation's Live Yes Connect groups are a great way to get support and learn more about positive coping strategies to manage arthritis and your mood. Groups meet in person or online. Visit connectgroups.arthritis.org for more information on how to join a community that understands you. Having been a community moderator, I can tell you that those places are absolute gems. Webinars, like I mentioned before, the Foundation offers free webinars every month, hosted by nationally recognized leaders in arthritis care. Registration for the webinars below is opening very soon. Arthritis in the workplace, employee rights and ergonomics. Learn how to manage related challenges at work and discover your rights to a safe and equal workplace environment under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Please learn about ergonomic solutions to relieve joints and make tasks more accessible. And that is October 25th from 6 to 7:15 Eastern. Supplements, herbs, and spices for arthritis, November 7th from 6 p.m. to 7:15 p.m. In this special webinar, we'll hear from an integrative rheumatologist who also has RA about the best natural treatments on the market. Better Health Through Communication is November 9th from 7 to 8:15 p.m. Eastern. Learn tips for successful doctor's appointments, including how to express your concerns and more. And don't forget, when you go to your doctor, laugh. The Jingle Bell Run, we're transitioning to Jingle Bell Run season. Join a team to help raise funds for a cure. Go to arthritis.org/JBR to register and find an event in your area. I can tell you that that's some of the most fun you will ever have. Podcasts, get more tips and real talk about arthritis from experts and patients who understand it best at arthritis.org/podcast. Also, don't forget the helpline. Remember, the Foundation's trained staff can help you navigate arthritis challenges, from treatment questions to insurance questions and more. Visit arthritis.org helpline to learn more. And survey, in a few days, you'll receive a survey asking about your experience this evening. Please take time to fill it out, and please do so honestly, so the Foundation can best serve you in the future. Finally, thank you to our sponsors. They have stepped forward to make this program possible, and what a terrific program it is. They are Tylenol and Kenvue. They have provided unbelievable support for this. Finally, thanks so much again for joining us tonight. Take care, and I hope each and every one of you have a pain-free tomorrow.